session will delve into the policy implications and the strategic significance of this Arctic region.
And it is very important because to do that, we are honored to have with us Mads Qvist Frederiksen, who is the Executive Director, Arctic Economic Council, who is joining us virtually. Mads, thank you very much for taking out your time. And joining me here on stage is Dr. M. Ravichandran, who is the Secretary, Ministry of Earth Sciences, Government of India. Mr. Ravichandran, sir, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Pleasure. And Amita, I'm going to ask that you please navigate what promises to be a power-packed discussion. Thank you so much. Amita, floor is yours.
Thank you, Pooja. Thank you, sir, for taking out your time. Mads, to you as well, it's a pleasure to have you with us. But as we talk about the Arctic Circle and the changes and the challenges that are being witnessed, Mads, what do you have to say on the challenges that have been witnessed over the years?
No, thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for putting on this very important conclave. I just want to first say that, as you mentioned in the opening, the Arctic region is facing global warming at 3 to 4 times the global average. Even in Svalbard, it's 7 times the global average. And this has an impact for India as well. It has an impact on the weather and the climate, I'm sure, but it also has an impact on the economies of the region. And I really do believe that the Arctic region, we are a vast area, but with only 4 million people. But together with India, we can make a big difference, because we all know that if all Indians jump at the same time, the world will spin around. So we can make a positive change with the help from India in the Arctic.
When you talk about change as part of the Arctic Economic Council, what are the changes that you are taking forward, the initiatives that you are taking forward at your end?
Yeah, thank you. So the Arctic Economic Council, we are a Pan-Arctic Business Membership Organization. So we are like CII in India. We are an organization of companies, and all these companies are operating in an environment where climate change has a massive impact. All these companies are also exporting companies. So that means they export fish, for example, or seaweed. They export energy, oil and gas, but also renewable energy. We heard about hydrogen earlier today. This is one of the things that the region can also export. And then it export raw materials. And what we are trying to say is that all of these things, we don't need all of it alone in the Arctic. We are just 4 million people in the Arctic region, but we are the size of 4% of the world's globe is in the Arctic, but only with 4 million people. So we need to export all of this. So what we are trying, the Arctic Economic Council, is to export things that can help mitigate or get us through the climate change, like raw materials that we need to build. Solar panels, we need to build wind turbines, or we need to build electric vehicles. The challenges here that we are also working on, some of the projects, the challenges here is that we need more investments, we need more infrastructure, and lastly, we need more people to come and work in the Arctic. And the skills and expertise that you have in India is so unique. For example, also when it comes to science and research that we will hear more about, you have some of the best glaciologists. You know how to operate in remote areas. You know how to operate in mountainous areas, similar to the environment we have in the Arctic. So what we are trying is we're trying to bridge India with the Arctic and try to bridge researchers, but also businesses with the Arctic region, so we together can solve this climate crisis.
Well, Dr. Ravichandran, Mads said India. And when it comes to India's role, sir, you have one of the prime responsibilities when it comes to being part of the ministry, sir. Do you believe when it comes to such kind of a collaboration, can it be worked out, especially owing to the Arctic Circle and its somewhat impact that can also happen on India?
Yeah, thank you. First, when you talk about the climate change, there are 3 important factors we have to think about. What is the impact? Number 1 is sea level rise. Number 2 is, maybe you can say that is Arctic or maybe sea ice reduction. And number 3 is atmospheric warming. All these 3 things are happening profoundly in the Arctic region. If you see that in the Arctic region, the atmosphere is warming 3 times faster than the global mean. That means it is a lot. Now, considering this, India would like to know what is the changes happening there, because Arctic, whatever is happening there, it is not local, it is a global impact. So it is having a lot of connections. So we have started making a lot of observations, not only in the particular things, all the three state of matter, atmosphere, ocean, and also cryosphere, solid space in cryosphere. All these three spheres we are trying to monitor in Arctic, and we try to see that what is the impact is happening in India. So just for example, if you want to say one of the example, if you say that in the short term, when there is a extreme rainfall is happening in India, especially in the northern India, the heat released in the atmosphere, it goes all the way to Arctic. And thereby, there it is melting, because this heat is induced melting, and that melt water, again it is coming into various places. But the Arctic sea ice reduction is also causes problem in Indian extreme rainfall, especially in the second half of the monsoon, August and September. The sea ice reduction, whatever the area, some of the Barents Sea and other places, it is always affect our extreme rainfall. That means it is a feedback loop. Whatever is happening Indian monsoon extreme weather, there is affecting sea ice, and whatever sea ice is happening, that is affecting our extreme rainfall. So because of that only nowadays, two very categorical changes is happening. The extreme rains are increasing, whereas the light rains are decreasing. Is one of the influencer is Arctic.
So do you believe, sir, when it comes to such major disasters that happen, as you mentioned, the months, because we are right in the middle of the monsoon season, and approaching months of August and September, as you said, are very crucial. Right from the sea to the mountains, do you believe that has an overall effect? Because we look at right from the mountains, landslides taking place, there are mountains that are crumbling, low-lying areas as far as seas and rivers are concerned, sir, they are being inundated, they are inundating, they are flooding residential areas too.
Yes. That's what now the extreme rainfall is the major concern. It is not only it is making a flooding events, landslide event in all these places. All these things happening mainly because of the changes happening in far away. So it is always we need to understand the process, what is happening there. So that is why we have put up a lot of observation in that area, and also we have put a lot of what is called modeling effort to teleconnection, what is the connection and other things. So I am sure that more and more year passes, the extreme rainfall will be increasing and the light rain will decrease. Once the extreme rainfall is increasing, even though the total average rainfall in the monsoon is almost same, but what is happening is the extreme rainfall, that means heavy intensity rains are increasing, light intensity is decreasing, and both spatially and temporally. Because of these two events, we are encountered with two problems. One is some places it's flooding, and other places it will be a drought. So even though monsoon is normally we can say, but we are encountering two problems. So this is having a remote effect from
We
there.
talk about those El Nino effects that seems to be taking place. Is that right, sir?
Yes. See, El Nino as well as La Nina effect and also IOD, these are all zonal connection. The meridional connection between Arctic and tropics, not much explored. So that is what we want to explore. What is the connection and what its impact in future? That's why we are seriously looking at that.
So Mads, that means that everything is interrelated. So what happens at your end affects us here. What happens our end affects you there. But when we talk about the observations, as Dr. Ravichandran was talking about, what have been your observations working in the AP, the council there, the Arctic Economic Council? How are we looking at the changes in the near future to have a more sustainable solution?
No, thank you. And I just want to say it's the situation that we heard described with heavy rainfall, but still the same total rainfall, landslides and droughts and floods is the same that we experience in the Arctic region. We can see that the environment is changing, the climate is changing, and we see it in front of our eyes. So we also have remote communities having landslides and avalanches and so on out of seasons. And we see that the ice is moving in a new way, and we don't know. It's getting harder and harder to predict, so we need these models. What we see also is we see that scientists are moving further and more coming into the Arctic. the Arctic region has become the canary in the mine, the canary bird in the mine, because we are really, if you want to understand what happens in India and the environment and the climate, you need to go to Svalbard and see or collect data from there. And this is what India has been doing for almost 20 years now. For the companies, they are also facing a lot of these challenges. We have to remember that when there is a drought or is a flood or a landslide or avalanche, it has an impact on the local companies that are operating in the region. I think the most famous example for many of the companies in the Arctic region is around permafrost. So when permafrost is melting, it makes the soil and the ground very, very unstable, and a lot of critical infrastructure is located on permafrost across the Arctic region. We have a challenge today that is very difficult to get permafrost data from large part of the Arctic because of there's some challenges with the war in Ukraine and the impact it has on the Arctic Council. So a lot of scientists have a hard time collecting climate data. And also just as distances in the Arctic region are very far, it's very expensive to operate there as a scientist. So what we're trying to do in the Arctic Economic Council is we're trying to link private sector with scientists. We are trying to say, how can we work together? How can what the companies are collecting of data for their own prediction, their own modeling, how can that benefit researchers around the world? And I also want to say that I really think that, we all know that we need green solutions. We need to have a just transition in the Arctic or elsewhere in the world, but we also need to have a solution. We need to have more renewable energy. We need to look into hydrogen, as you have already talked about. And for this, a lot of the solutions are in the Arctic. We are currently doing projects around solar panels in small remote communities in the far Arctic. There's been looking at wind turbines, for example. Some of my members are looking at carbon capture and storage. So a lot of the solutions to mitigate some of the challenges would also be in the Arctic, and that's what we are trying to work on. But just to say here that we really, living in the Arctic region, you can see the weather is changing, and you see it in front of your eyes. And I think it's very, very important that events like this also puts attention to the Arctic, because it's a place where people live as well. Thank you.
Yes, but Mads, because you've been mentioning as far as thawing permafrost or even when it comes to receding glaciers, what do you believe would be important infrastructural investments that need to be made?
So first of all, we need to understand, we need to be able to predict. So that's the modeling we heard about. That's very, very important to be able to take decisions. Then we also need to say, okay, there's obviously bad things is going to happen, but there will also be positive things. There will be opening new shipping routes. New shipping routes might mean shorter distances. It can also be that species of fish or seaweed or kelp will move to new places, which will transform the food systems. So we have to look at both the positive and the negative impact that climate change will have. We then need to say, okay, we need to build infrastructures that is on a proper good soil. So we need the climate data for that. And then we also need to invest more in, for example, housing in the Arctic region as well, but also for scientists and so on. And I really, really think if we invest more in infrastructures in the Arctic region, we can also take a lot of lessons here and move, for example, to the Himalayas. Like building in cold climate, in high altitudes, we can learn a lot here. And let me give you one example here. We are working on a project together with a famous Norwegian Sami indigenous explorer who has climbed Mount Everest. He climbed all the highest peaks in the world, and he's looking at how can we collect waste from this region using new technologies. Because the changing of the climate means that, for example, more tourism will come, more climbers are coming, but it also means that more waste is being exposed. And climate change is also about taking care of the environment. It's not only the long-term climate, also the short-term and taking care of our environment and biodiversity. So what we're looking into now is how can we, for example, use drones to pick up trash on remote areas like the Mount Everest, for example.
Right.
So we are trying to look at very short-term things we can do and very long-term big things we can do.
I think let's delve a little more on that, Dr. Ravichandran, the short term and the long term. Are there any studies or events that you mentioned when it comes to certain kind of a collaboration where the ministry themselves has taken an initiative to study and to mitigate the factors that the Arctic region or with the nations there, that are they working together, sir?
Yeah, Arctic is not belongs to one nation. We have to work in collaborative way because a lot more need to observe so that we need to understand so that we can plan for better preparation of mitigation and other things. So in India, we are working towards working with basically with the Norway in Svalbard. We have put many of the observing systems in the Norway, in the ocean fjord especially, how the fjord system changes, how atmospheric pollutions and other things are happening there, and also how the glaciology is changing. And then at that location in Svalbard, there are about 7 countries are there. So we work together, all the 7 countries. What are the various aspects? Because we don't want to duplicate anything, but at the same time, we need to have a what is called complementary role. So we are doing some of the things, fjord measurements. Maybe China is doing something, Korea is doing something, and Italy, France, all these countries are there. So we share the responsibility in Arctic fjord, maybe especially in Svalbard. More than that, we are also going for in Canadian Arctic, because the Canadian Arctic is very important because, as I mentioned, the extreme rainfall, whatever is happening, the heat releases, it goes to Canadian Arctic. So in Cambridge Bay in Canadian Arctic, we are measuring various components in CHAOS station. So India is established from last year onwards, we have started working on Canada. And also now this year we are planning to, maybe next year onwards, we want to go for Greenland, Denmark. So also we are working with Russia. And apart from that, the US and other group of community in the Arctic states, we are working especially on the teleconnection issues in the modeling aspects. So various countries we are working with the Arctic states, not only Arctic states, but also those who are in a stake in Arctic.
Absolutely. And Mads, when we talk about building resilience, how do we do that, especially when it comes to the Arctic and the climate change, and that is being witnessed so rapidly?
It might not be the most obvious answer, but I think to build resilience, we need to look at the people living in the region, but also elsewhere. So education, and education, if I could pick 3 things. We need to educate people about climate change. We also need, because people need to understand that it's a human-based development that is happening at the moment. So we need to change, for example, just our food systems. We need to change what we eat. We need to eat less. We need to eat more healthy. We need to look at circularity. And all of this is in long term going to lead to more resilient societies if we consume less of the wrong things. And then education is also about making societies ready for the new world that we are facing. You know, so that's, for example, understanding the weather forecast better, understanding how we can move to the right areas and how we're going to live here. So that's one part of resilience. That's actually within the Arctic Council and also within many universities are also looking at resilience around how can we make sure that societies can survive, remote societies can survive in their current condition. And one area here is also connectivity. So space technology, satellites, subsea fiber optic cables, making sure that the unconnected becomes connected and we bridge this digital divide that there is in the Arctic. So resilient society is also being able to communicate, being able to do online learning, e-health, and so on. So those are some of the fields we need to look into. And I just want to briefly, the Secretary mentioned Greenland, and I have a strong passion for Greenland, and I really think it's a fascinating country to go and visit for climate change, because 80% of Greenland, the world's largest island, is inland ice. And it's really retracting very, very, very fast. And it's in a vast area with only 56,000 people lives in all of Greenland. So you also got very remote communities, very remote societies, and they are highly impacted by climate change as well. So I would highly applaud if India would get into Greenland and do more climate studies there. Thank you.
Well, Mads also witnessed and talked about when it comes to the correlation that we have, what the impact happens there, it can be seen here. But as we talk about building resilience, what on part of the government are we taking up when it comes to measures? Because India currently has been witnessing extreme temperatures.
Yeah, basically first and foremost, according to me, that we need to understand what is happening there and then what is happening here, the connections and other things. In terms of resilience, of course, we have put up various activities in India, especially if it is a heavy rainfall happens, what is to be done? So we need to plan our strategy, not only from agriculture point of view, but various ponds and other things we have to create. Because the runoff will be more, how do we go for that to save? So like that, various aspects we need to cater, because it is going to be changed. So one is, as I mentioned about the sea level rise, in coastal belt also is going to be changed, and the heavy rains, and also various activities related to the warm temperatures. So these are all we need to, people to be first and foremost, first to make the awareness about the people. So each individual can safeguard, but at the same time, government also planning various mitigation and adaptation strategy.
So that means when it comes to the people's initiatives and the government's involvement is something that needs to go hand in hand, and of course studying the direct impact when it comes to the Arctic region that also has here in India. Of course, when there is an alarm that is being raised, all of these areas collectively need to be studied, they need to be looked into. This is the policy perspectives, ladies and gentlemen, that we are talking about. Mads, thank you very much for joining us here, and it's been a pleasure having you with us with all the insights. Very inspiring as well, Dr. Ravichandran sir, for taking out your time, and of course the great work that is being done by the ministries.
Of course, thanks to you, Amita, and we ask that you please present our panelists, at least those in person, with a plantation certificate, which is of course indicative of the trees that we've planted in their name. Part of the special initiative on which